Jacob Kane had developed a reputation aboard the research vessel Meridian for being able to fix anything that broke, malfunctioned, or spontaneously achieved sentience, which, on a ship exploring the outer rim of known space, happened with disturbing frequency. His workshop in the engineering section had become a pilgrimage site for crew members whose equipment had decided to interpret basic functionality as a suggestion rather than a requirement. Jacob, came the voice from his workshop doorway, melodic in the way that made humans stop mid-conversation and wonder if they'd heard music. "I need your help with something." Jacob looked up from the quantum resonance scanner he'd been coaxing back to life through a combination of technical expertise and what his grandmother would have called percussive maintenance. Lyra Vex stood in the doorway with the fluid grace that characterized her people, her crystalline patches catching the workshop's LED lighting and casting rainbow reflections on the bulkheads. "Let me guess," Jacob said, setting down his tools and giving her his full attention. "Your bioneural interface is acting up again." Lyra nodded, unconsciously touching the elegant crystal formation at her left temple. "The feedback loops are getting worse. Yesterday during the hyperspace navigation sequence, I actually saw colors that don't exist in human visual spectrum overlaid with what I think were mathematical equations in ancient Terran Sanskrit. That's actually kind of impressive from a technical standpoint," Jacob admitted. "Also probably not supposed to happen." "Definitely not supposed to happen," Lyra confirmed with the hint of smile that Jacob had learned to recognize over their 18 months of serving together. "The hallucinations are bad enough, but the headaches afterward make me want to launch myself out the nearest airlock." Jacob gestured to the examination chair he kept for delicate work, noting how Lyra hesitated before settling into it. The Etherians were a naturally graceful species, but Lyra moved with particular elegance that suggested either extensive training or natural talent that made her one of the best navigators in the fleet. "When did the problem start?" Jacob asked, pulling up her equipment records on his diagnostic screen. "About 2 weeks ago, right after that ion storm we flew through near the Vegan Nebula," Lyra replied. "The interface systems took a beating during that navigation sequence, and ever since then it's been like trying to think through static." Jacob nodded, familiar with the aftermath of that particular adventure. The storm had pushed every system on the ship beyond normal operating parameters, and he'd spent a week repairing equipment that had decided the laws of physics were optional. "I'll need to examine the interface directly," Jacob said, moving his workstation closer to her chair. "Fair warning, I've never worked on Etherian biotech before. Most of your equipment is grown rather than built, which makes it a completely different animal than human engineering." "That's why I came to you," Lyra said quietly. "Everyone says you can fix anything." Jacob felt a flutter of pride at the compliment, though he tried to maintain professional composure as he began examining Lyra's interface headset. The device was a work of art as much as technology, delicate crystalline structures that seemed to grow directly from the metal base, with bioneural connections that interfaced with the crystal patches on Lyra's skin. "This is remarkable," Jacob murmured, studying the way the organic and technological components had merged seamlessly. "It's like jewelry designed by someone who understood quantum mechanics at an artistic level." "Etherian engineers spend decades learning to grow interface systems," Lyra explained. "The bioneural connections have to be cultivated to match each individual's neural patterns. No two are exactly alike." Jacob carefully lifted the headset to examine the connection points where it would interface with Lyra's temple crystals. The craftsmanship was beyond anything human engineering had achieved, but he could see stress fractures in the crystalline matrix that suggested damage from electromagnetic interference. "I can see the problem," he said, adjusting his work light to get a better view. "The ion storm created microfractures in the crystal matrix. They're small enough that the device still functions, but they're causing signal distortion that your brain interprets as sensory input. Can you fix it?" Lyra asked, and Jacob caught something in her tone that suggested this repair meant more to her than simple professional convenience. "I think so," Jacob replied, reaching for his finest precision tools. "But I'll need to work directly with the interface points while you're wearing it. The bioneural connections are too delicate to repair without active feedback from your neural patterns." Lyra nodded, settling back in the chair as Jacob carefully positioned the headset on her head. The crystal formations at her temples aligned perfectly with the interface points, creating connections that seemed to pulse with gentle light as the system synchronized. "Let me know if anything feels uncomfortable," Jacob said, beginning his examination of the first interface point. The work required incredible precision as Jacob traced the microscopic fractures in the crystal matrix. His fingers moved carefully around the interface connections, occasionally brushing against Lyra's temple as he adjusted his tools for better access. The first time his fingertip accidentally made contact with one of her crystal patches, Lyra's reaction was immediate and unexpected. She shivered slightly, her eyes fluttering closed, and whispered, "That tickles." Jacob jerked his hand back as if he'd been burned. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "It's okay," Lyra said quickly, though her cheeks had taken on a faint luminescence that indicated embarrassment in her species. "I should have warned you. The bioneural patches are sensitive." "Sensitive how?" Jacob asked, though part of him suspected he already knew the answer. "They're nerve clusters," Lyra explained, her voice carefully controlled. "They serve as interfaces for our technology, but they're also... well, they respond to touch in ways that can be quite intense." Jacob felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized the implications. "So when I accidentally touched your temple, I was basically touching one of the most sensitive areas of Etherian anatomy," Lyra finished, her own embarrassment evident. "It's not painful, just unexpectedly pleasant." They sat in awkward silence for a moment, both processing the fact that what should have been routine equipment repair had suddenly become something far more intimate than either had anticipated. "I still need to fix your interface," Jacob said finally. "But I'll be more careful about where I put my hands." "Actually," Lyra said quietly, "the contact might be necessary. Etherian repair techniques often require direct neural feedback through the interface patches. If you're going to fix the microfractures, you might need to maintain some level of contact to monitor the repair progress." Jacob studied her face, searching for any sign that she was uncomfortable with the arrangement. "Are you sure? I don't want to do anything that makes you feel..." "I trust you," Lyra interrupted, meeting his eyes directly. "You're the best engineer on this ship, and my navigation systems are too important to leave damaged. Besides, it's not unpleasant. Just unexpectedly intimate." Jacob nodded slowly, understanding the professional necessity even as he struggled with the personal implications. "Okay. But the moment you feel uncomfortable, you tell me to stop." "Agreed," Lyra said, settling back into the chair with visible determination. Jacob resumed his work with newfound awareness of every movement, every accidental contact with Lyra's crystalline patches. Each time his fingers brushed against her temples, he felt her slight shiver, heard her quiet intake of breath, and began to understand that he wasn't just repairing equipment. He was participating in something that was fundamentally intimate for her species. "The fractures are more extensive than I thought," Jacob said as he worked, his voice carefully professional despite the growing awareness of Lyra's responses to his touch. "This is going to take longer than expected." "That's fine," Lyra replied, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there at the beginning of the session. "I'm not going anywhere." As Jacob continued the delicate repair work, he found himself increasingly aware of Lyra as more than just a colleague with broken equipment. Her quiet gasps when he touched particularly sensitive areas, the way she relaxed under his gentle ministrations, the growing trust evident in her willingness to let him work with the most vulnerable aspects of her biology, all of it combined to create an intimacy that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with professional care evolving into something deeper. "There," Jacob said finally, completing the initial phase of repairs. "The major fractures are sealed. How does that feel?" Lyra activated her interface, her crystal patches glowing softly as she tested the connections. "Much better. The static is almost gone." She looked at him with gratitude that seemed to encompass more than just technical expertise. "Thank you, Jacob. I know this isn't exactly standard equipment repair." "Nothing about this job is standard," Jacob replied with a smile. But I have to admit, working with Etherian biotech is fascinating. Your people have achieved integration between biology and technology that we're still decades away from understanding. Maybe, Lyra said, rising from the chair with her characteristic grace, I could teach you more about how our systems work. If you're interested in learning. Jacob found himself nodding before he'd fully considered the implications. I'd like that. Though I should probably brush up on interspecies sensitivity protocols before our next session. Lyra's laugh was like silver bells in the workshop's utilitarian environment. I'll bring some reference materials. And Jacob? Thank you for being so careful with me. Not everyone would have taken the time to understand what the repair process meant from my perspective. As she left his workshop, Jacob sat back in his chair and wondered what exactly he'd gotten himself into. Fixing equipment was supposed to be straightforward: identify the problem, apply the appropriate solution, return to operational status. But working with Lyra's bioneural interface had introduced variables that had nothing to do with technical specifications and everything to do with the growing realization that some repairs required more than just mechanical expertise. They required trust, patience, and the kind of careful attention that transformed routine maintenance into something approaching art. Jacob was looking forward to their next session with an anticipation that had very little to do with crystalline matrix repairs and everything to do with the woman who whispered, "That tickles," when he touched her most sensitive places. The second repair session took place 3 days later, after Lyra had suffered another navigation malfunction that left her seeing geometric patterns in languages that predated human civilization. Jacob had spent the intervening time researching Etherian physiology and biotechnology integration, discovering that his understanding of their systems had been embarrassingly superficial. I brought those reference materials I promised, Lyra said, entering his workshop with a data pad and what appeared to be a bottle of something that sparkled like liquid starlight. And some Etherian synthesis fluid to help with the bioneural integration process. Jacob accepted the data pad and examined the bottle with professional curiosity. Synthesis fluid. It helps organic and technological components interface more smoothly, Lyra explained, settling into the examination chair that Jacob had modified with additional cushioning after their last session. Think of it as a conductivity enhancer that works with biological systems instead of electronic ones. Jacob activated the data pad and found himself immersed in technical specifications that revolutionized his understanding of Etherian technology. Their bioneural interfaces weren't simply organic computers, they were living systems that grew and adapted to their users, creating unique partnerships between biology and technology that evolved over time. This is incredible, Jacob said, scrolling through diagrams that showed how Etherian neural patches developed from birth, slowly integrating with technological systems as the individual matured. Your interface isn't just equipment you wear, it's practically a part of your body. Exactly, Lyra confirmed, touching one of her temple crystals unconsciously. Which is why your repair work is so intimate. You're not just fixing machinery, you're working directly with my nervous system. Jacob felt his understanding of their previous session shift as he realized the level of trust Lyra had shown him. Allowing a human to work directly with her bioneural systems was equivalent to permitting surgery by someone from an entirely different medical tradition. I had no idea, Jacob said quietly. When you asked me to repair your interface, I thought it was just advanced equipment maintenance. I didn't understand that I was basically performing medical procedures. Medical procedures with a very personal component, Lyra added, her luminescent blush returning. The sensitivity of the neural patches serves multiple functions in Etherian physiology. They're technological interfaces, certainly, but they're also, well, they're erogenous zones. Jacob nearly dropped the data pad as the full implications hit him. So when I was touching your temples during the repair, you were creating physical responses that Etherians typically only experience during intimate relationships, Lyra confirmed matter-of-factly. Which is why most of my people would never allow someone outside their family or bonded partnerships to work on their interfaces. The workshop fell silent except for the hum of diagnostic equipment as both of them processed the significance of what Lyra was telling him. Jacob had accidentally been engaging in what amounted to intimate contact by Etherian standards, while Lyra had been experiencing sensations that her culture reserved for romantic partnerships. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" Jacob asked. "Because you needed to approach the work without preconceptions," Lyra replied. "If you'd known the cultural implications from the beginning, you would have been too concerned about propriety to do the delicate work properly. And because..." She hesitated, her crystal patches flickering with soft light that Jacob was learning to recognize as emotional response. "Because what?" "Because I wanted to see if you would be careful with me even without understanding the full context," Lyra finished quietly. "It was a test of character, and you passed beautifully." Jacob set down the data pad and looked at Lyra directly, trying to process everything he'd learned about Etherian physiology, biotechnology, and the woman sitting in his workshop chair. "So what happens now? Do we continue the repairs, or would you prefer to find an Etherian engineer?" "There are no other Etherian engineers within 6 months' travel," Lyra pointed out. "And besides, your work was remarkably effective. The interface improvements you made exceeded anything our own technicians had achieved." "How is that possible?" Jacob asked. "I barely understand your technology." "That's exactly why it worked so well," Lyra explained, leaning forward with enthusiasm that made her crystal patches glow more brightly. "Etherian engineers approach bioneural interfaces with centuries of tradition and established techniques. You approached mine with fresh perspective and genuine curiosity about how the systems actually functioned." Jacob considered this as he prepared his tools for the day's session, applying the synthesis fluid to his precision instruments as Lyra had instructed. "So my ignorance was actually an advantage?" "Your lack of preconceptions was an advantage," Lyra corrected. "Combined with your natural skill and the care you showed for my comfort during the process." As Jacob began the second phase of repairs, he found that his research had given him new appreciation for the complexity of what he was attempting. Each micro-adjustment to the crystalline matrix required monitoring Lyra's neural responses to ensure he wasn't causing damage to her biological systems. "The synthesis fluid makes the contact more comfortable," Lyra explained as Jacob began working with her temple interfaces. "It enhances conductivity while reducing the intensity of nerve stimulation." Jacob discovered she was right. The fluid allowed him to maintain the necessary contact with her neural patches while reducing the overwhelming sensitivity that had characterized their first session. Lyra's responses were still present but more manageable, allowing both of them to focus on the technical aspects of the repair. "Your neural patterns are fascinating," Jacob said as he monitored the biofeedback displays. "The integration between your organic consciousness and the technological systems is seamless. It's like watching poetry written in quantum mechanics." "That's a beautiful way to describe it," Lyra replied, her voice carrying warmth that had nothing to do with the technical work. "Most humans who encounter Etherian biotech focus on the mechanical aspects. You're the first to notice the artistic elements." As the session progressed, Jacob found himself increasingly attuned to the subtle rhythms of Lyra's bioneural systems. Her crystal patches pulsed with patterns that reflected her emotional state, her comfort level, and her trust in his abilities. It was like learning to read an entirely new language written in light and sensation. "There's something I need to tell you," Lyra said during a pause in the repair work. "The level of neural interface we're achieving isn't typical for Etherian technology repair." "What do you mean?" Jacob asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "The synthesis fluid, the extended contact with my neural patches, the feedback integration we're creating. It's establishing what my people call a bioneural bond," Lyra explained carefully. "A permanent connection between your consciousness and my interface systems." Jacob stopped working and stared at her. "Permanent?" "Not in a controlling way," Lyra assured him quickly. "But we're creating a technological relationship that will allow you to interface with my bioneural systems even when we're not in direct contact. It's something that typically only develops between Etherian mates." The implications of what she was telling him settled over Jacob like a warm blanket made of anxiety and excitement. Are you saying that repairing your equipment is accidentally creating some kind of alien marriage bond? More like a technological partnership that my culture recognizes as equivalent to marriage, Lyra corrected with a smile that suggested she found his panic amusing. Though the bond can be dissolved if both parties choose to do so. Jacob considered this information while continuing his work on her interface systems, noting how his hands had grown increasingly steady and confident as he learned to read her responses. And if we don't choose to dissolve it? Then we become permanent partners in both technological and personal senses, Lyra replied. The bioneural bond would allow us to share interface capabilities, enhance each other's technical abilities, and create a level of cooperation that neither of our species has achieved independently. That sounds remarkably like a sales pitch, Jacob observed. Lyra's laugh was music in the utilitarian workshop. Perhaps because I've discovered that I rather like having a partner who approaches my most sensitive systems with the care and curiosity you've shown. Jacob paused in his work to meet her eyes directly. Are you saying you want this bond to become permanent? I'm saying that working with you has been the most comfortable and effective interface maintenance I've ever experienced, Lyra replied. And that I find myself looking forward to these sessions for reasons that have nothing to do with equipment repair. As Jacob returned to his work, he found himself considering the possibility that routine maintenance could evolve into something approaching love when approached with the right combination of skill, patience, and genuine care for one's partner. Lyra, he said as he completed the day's repairs, would you like to have dinner with me tonight? Somewhere that doesn't involve bioneural interfaces or technological bonding. I'd like that very much, Lyra replied, her crystal patches glowing with what Jacob was learning to recognize as happiness. Though I should warn you that the bonding process has already begun. You might find yourself dreaming in Etherean navigation patterns. Could be worse, Jacob said with a grin. At least they'll be beautiful dreams. As Lyra left his workshop, Jacob realized that he was looking forward to those dreams almost as much as their next repair session. 2 weeks into their repair sessions, Jacob had developed what could only be described as an intuitive understanding of Etherean biotechnology that impressed even Lyra. Their daily sessions had evolved beyond equipment maintenance into something approaching technological artistry, with Jacob making improvements to her interface systems that enhanced her navigation capabilities beyond standard specifications. Jacob, Dr. Sarah Walsh said, appearing in his workshop doorway with the expression she reserved for situations that required diplomatic intervention, we need to talk. Jacob looked up from the bioneural calibration he'd been performing on Lyra's headset, noting how Dr. Walsh's gaze moved suspiciously between him and Lyra, who was currently interfaced with the diagnostic systems in a way that made her crystal patches glow like captured starlight. What can I do for you, Sarah? Jacob asked, though he suspected he already knew what this conversation would cover. You can explain why Navigation Officer Vex has been spending 2 hours a day in your workshop for the past 2 weeks, Dr. Walsh replied, stepping into the workshop with the authority that came with being the ship's chief xenobiologist. And why her performance metrics have improved by 30% during the same period. Lyra opened her eyes and disconnected from the diagnostic interface, her crystal patches dimming to their normal luminescence. Dr. Walsh, Chief Kane has been performing maintenance on my bioneural systems. The improvements in my navigation accuracy are a direct result of his exceptional technical work. Maintenance that requires 2 hours daily. Dr. Walsh asked with the tone of someone who suspected she wasn't getting the complete truth. I've reviewed Etherean technical manuals, and standard interface maintenance should be completed in minutes, not hours. Jacob exchanged glances with Lyra, both of them understanding that their extended sessions had attracted exactly the kind of attention they'd been hoping to avoid. The growing intimacy of their technological partnership had required increasingly sophisticated explanations to maintain professional appearances. Dr. Walsh, Jacob said carefully, Lyra's interface systems suffered extensive damage during the ion storm. The repair work requires delicate recalibration that can't be rushed without risking permanent damage to her bioneural pathways. It was the truth, technically, though it omitted crucial details about the nature of their growing technological bond and the personal intimacy that had developed alongside their professional partnership. I see, Dr. Walsh said, examining the diagnostic equipment with the practiced eye of someone who understood biological systems. And this recalibration requires daily sessions because Etherian biotechnology adapts continuously, Lyra interjected smoothly. The interface systems grow and change in response to usage patterns. Daily maintenance ensures optimal integration between biological and technological components. Dr. Walsh studied both of them with the intensity that had made her one of the most respected xenobiologists in the fleet. I've been researching Etherian interface technology since these sessions began. What you're describing sounds less like maintenance and more like bioneural bonding. The silence that followed was filled only with the hum of diagnostic equipment and the rapid beating of Jacob's heart as he realized their secret was no longer secret. Bioneural bonding? Lyra asked with carefully controlled innocence. Dr. Walsh, that's a very specific technical term. What exactly do you think is happening here? I think, Dar. Walsh said, settling into the workshop's spare chair with the determination of someone planning to get answers, that Chief Kane has accidentally created a technological partnership with you that goes considerably beyond equipment repair. I also think that both of you are well aware of what's happening and have chosen not to report it through proper channels. Jacob felt the careful professional boundaries they'd maintained beginning to crumble under Dr. Walsh's scrutiny. Sarah, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, Dr. Walsh interrupted. You've been performing bioneural integration with an Etherian crew member, creating technological bonds that your respective species regulations require to be reported to command staff. The question is whether this bonding is consensual and beneficial, or whether someone needs to intervene before you accidentally compromise ship operations. Lyra moved closer to Jacob's workstation, her crystal patches flickering with the patterns Jacob had learned to associate with protective instincts. Dr. Walsh, I can assure you that everything Chief Kane has done has been with my full consent and has dramatically improved my ability to perform my duties. I don't doubt your consent, Dr. Walsh replied. I'm concerned about the implications of an unreported interspecies technological partnership aboard a research vessel. These bonds can affect judgment, compromise professional objectivity, and create dependencies that interfere with crew dynamics. Or, Jacob said, finding his voice as he realized the conversation had moved beyond avoiding trouble to defending their relationship, they can create partnerships that enhance both individuals' capabilities and demonstrate new possibilities for interspecies cooperation. Dr. Walsh studied Jacob's face with renewed interest. Is that what you believe is happening here? I believe, Jacob said, reaching for Lyra's hand in a gesture that felt both natural and significant, that working with Lyra has taught me more about biotechnology integration than I could have learned in years of traditional study. I also believe that our partnership has helped her achieve navigation capabilities that exceed anything in her previous service record. And personally? Dr. Walsh asked. What's happening between you two on a personal level? Jacob looked at Lyra, seeing in her expression the same mixture of vulnerability and determination that had characterized their first repair session. Personally, I've fallen in love with someone who trusted me with the most sensitive aspects of her biology and technology. Someone who's taught me that the best partnerships require equal parts technical skill and emotional care. I love him too, Lyra said quietly, her crystal patches glowing with the warm light Jacob had learned to associate with happiness. The bioneural bond we've created isn't just technological, it's become the foundation for a relationship that enhances both our professional and personal lives. Dr. Walsh leaned back in her chair, processing what they'd told her with the methodical approach she applied to all xenobiological phenomena. How deep is this bond? Are we talking about surface-level interface sharing or complete bioneural integration? Deep enough that I can sense Jacob's emotional state when we're connected, Lyra admitted. Deep enough that he can optimize my interface systems through intuitive understanding rather than technical analysis. Deep enough that separating the bond would be difficult for both of us. In other words, Dr. Walsh said, you've accidentally created what amounts to an interspecies marriage through equipment repair. That's a rather reductive way to describe a technological partnership that's revolutionizing both our capabilities, Jacob replied, though he couldn't deny the accuracy of her assessment. It's also a violation of about 12 different regulations regarding undisclosed relationships between crew members, Dr. Walsh pointed out. Though I have to admit, the performance improvements you've both shown suggest this partnership is beneficial rather than problematic. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's communication system crackling to life with an emergency alert. All senior staff to the bridge immediately. We have a navigation crisis requiring immediate attention. Jacob and Lyra exchanged glances, both understanding that whatever emergency awaited them would test their partnership in ways that went far beyond workshop sessions and theoretical discussions. Dar. Walsh, Lyra said, rising from her position with the fluid grace that marked her species, we need to get to the bridge. But I want you to know that everything Jacob and I have done has been in service of making this ship and crew more effective. I believe you, Dr. Walsh replied, following them toward the workshop exit. But after we handle whatever crisis is waiting for us, we're going to have a serious discussion about proper reporting procedures and the implications of bioneural bonding for crew dynamics. As they rushed toward the bridge, Jacob found himself grateful that their secret partnership was finally in the open, even as he wondered whether the emergency they were about to face would prove the value of their bond or destroy everything they'd built together. Either way, he realized, they would face it as partners in every sense of the word. The bridge was in controlled chaos when Jacob and Lyra arrived, with Captain Morrison studying tactical displays that showed the Meridian trapped in a gravitational anomaly that defied standard navigation protocols. The ship's primary navigation systems had failed, leaving them drifting toward a spatial phenomenon that sensors couldn't properly analyze. Navigation, report, Captain Morrison ordered as Lyra took her position at the helm. Primary NAV systems are offline, Lyra replied, her hands moving over controls with practiced efficiency. The gravitational distortions are interfering with our hyperspace calculations, and the backup systems don't have enough processing power to compensate for the anomalous readings. How long before we're pulled into the phenomenon? The captain asked. 4 hours at current drift rate, Lyra responded, her crystal patches flickering as she interfaced with the damaged navigation systems. But Captain, attempting to navigate out of this using standard protocols could result in spatial displacement that sends us hundreds of light-years off course. Jacob studied the tactical displays, his mind racing as he considered the technical specifications of the ship's navigation systems and the modifications he'd made to Lyra's bioneural interfaces. Captain, I think we can solve this, but it's going to require using the bioneural enhancements that Lyra and I have been developing. Captain Morrison turned to face them both, his expression mixing urgency with curiosity. Explain. The modifications I've made to Lyra's interface systems have created processing capabilities that exceed standard navigation parameters, Jacob explained, moving to the engineering console. Combined with the bioneural bond we've established, we can create a hybrid consciousness that can handle calculations too complex for either human or Etherian systems alone. Bioneural bond? Captain Morrison asked, his tone suggesting that this conversation was raising more questions than it answered. Sir, Dr. Walsh interjected from her position near the science station, Chief Kane and Navigator Vex have developed a technological partnership that enhances both their capabilities. Given our current crisis, I recommend we authorize its use regardless of regulatory implications. Lyra was already connecting to the damaged navigation systems, her crystal patches glowing more brightly as she attempted to process the complex gravitational data. Jacob, I'm getting massive computational overload. The spatial distortions are creating calculation chains that exceed my processing capacity. Then we do this together, Jacob said, moving to her station and activating the bioneural interface protocols they developed during their workshop sessions. When Jacob placed his hands on Lyra's temples, connecting with her crystal patches while she maintained interface with the navigation systems, something unprecedented happened. Instead of the gentle sensory sharing they'd experienced during equipment repairs, their consciousness merged completely, creating a hybrid awareness that combined human intuitive problem-solving with Etherian computational precision. Through their shared consciousness, Jacob could perceive the gravitational phenomenon as Lyra did, not as a threat, but as a complex mathematical structure that could be navigated if approached with the right combination of technical knowledge and artistic understanding. Meanwhile, Lyra gained access to Jacob's engineering expertise, allowing her to optimize the ship's systems in ways that had never been attempted. Navigation online, Lyra announced, though her voice carried harmonics that suggested Jacob was speaking through her vocal cords as well. We have a solution to the gravitational trap, but it's going to require precise coordination between engineering and navigation systems. Execute, Captain Morrison ordered without hesitation. What followed was the most complex navigation sequence in the Meridian's service history. Jacob and Lyra, functioning as a single hybrid consciousness, manipulated the ship's systems with precision that exceeded anything either could have achieved independently. Jacob's modifications to the navigation systems allowed Lyra to process computational loads that should have been impossible for organic consciousness, while Lyra's bioneural capabilities gave Jacob intuitive understanding of spatial relationships that human engineering couldn't achieve. Gravitational escape in progress, Lyra reported, her crystal patches blazing with light as she channeled power through systems that had been optimized beyond their original specifications. Engineering, I need maximum power to the spatial displacement generators. You've got it, Jacob replied, though he was simultaneously monitoring Lyra's bioneural stress levels and adjusting system parameters to prevent overload of either the ship's technology or her biological systems. The ship shuddered as it broke free from the gravitational trap, emerging into normal space with system readings that confirmed they had successfully navigated one of the most dangerous spatial phenomena on record. Navigation successful, Captain Morrison announced to the bridge crew. Outstanding work, both of you. As Jacob disconnected from the bioneural interface, both he and Lyra swayed from the intensity of their shared experience. The connection they'd just maintained had been far deeper than anything they'd achieved during their workshop sessions, creating a level of technological and personal intimacy that left them both changed. That was. Lyra began, then trailed off as she searched for words to describe what they'd experienced. Incredible, Jacob finished, steadying her as she disconnected from the navigation systems. I could feel everything you were thinking, every calculation, every intuitive leap. It was like being two people with one consciousness. Captain Morrison approached their station with the expression of someone who had witnessed something that challenged his understanding of what was possible. I think we need a full briefing on exactly what just happened here. Over the following hour, Jacob and Lyra explained their accidental bioneural bonding, the technological enhancements they'd achieved, and the implications of their partnership for future interspecies cooperation. The captain listened with the attention of someone who understood that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. So, Captain Morrison said finally, you're telling me that equipment repair evolved into a technological marriage that just saved my ship? That's a reasonably accurate summary, Dr. Walsh confirmed. Though I'd emphasize that their partnership represents a new form of interspecies cooperation that could revolutionize how we approach complex technical challenges. And personally, the captain asked, studying both Jacob and Lyra. Where does this leave your relationship as crew members? Jacob reached for Lyra's hand, finding comfort in a contact that had become natural over their weeks of working together. Captain, we'd like to request formal recognition as bonded partners according to both human and Etherian customs. Our technological partnership has evolved into something personal that enhances rather than compromises our professional effectiveness. The bioneural bond we've created allows us to share capabilities in ways that benefit the entire crew, Lyra added. Jacob has become an expert in Etherian biotechnology, while I've gained understanding of human engineering principles that makes me a more effective navigator. Captain Morrison considered their request with the weight of command decisions that could set precedents for interspecies relationships throughout the fleet. Dr. Walsh, from a xenobiological perspective, are there any medical concerns about this bonding? None that I can detect, Dr. Walsh replied. If anything, the partnership appears to enhance both their physical and mental capabilities. Their bioneural integration is stable, beneficial, and represents evolutionary adaptation rather than technological dependence. In that case, Captain Morrison said with a smile, "I hereby recognize Chief Kane and Navigator Vex as bonded partners according to both human and Etherian traditions. I'm also formally recommending that Starfleet Command study their partnership as a model for future interspecies cooperation protocols." 6 months later, Jacob and Lyra stood together in the ship's modified workshop, which had been expanded to accommodate both human engineering techniques and Etherian biotechnology integration. Their relationship had stabilized into a partnership that combined professional excellence with personal intimacy, proving that the most profound connections could emerge from simple acts of service performed with skill and care. "The new bioneural interfaces are ready for testing," Lyra announced, indicating a workbench covered with devices that represented their joint development of human-Etherian hybrid technology. "Think the other couples will have as much fun with the installation process as we did?" Jacob asked with a grin, remembering their own accidental bonding through equipment repair. "I doubt anyone else will discover technological intimacy by accident," Lyra replied, settling into the examination chair that had become a symbol of their relationship. But then again, the best discoveries are usually unexpected. As Jacob began the routine maintenance that kept their bioneural bond functioning at optimal levels, both of them reflected on how a whispered, that tickles, had evolved into a love story that was reshaping interspecies cooperation throughout the galaxy. Their workshop had become a pilgrimage site for couples from multiple species who wanted to learn how technology and biology could enhance rather than replace emotional connection. "Ready for today's calibration?" Jacob asked, his hands steady and confident as he prepared to work with systems that no longer held any mystery for him. "Always," Lyra replied, her crystal patches beginning to glow with anticipation. "Though I have to admit, even after all these months, your touch still makes me shiver." "Good," Jacob said, leaning down to kiss her gently before beginning their work. "I'd hate for this to become purely routine." As he began the delicate adjustments that maintained their technological bond, both Jacob and Lyra understood that they had discovered something rare and beautiful, a partnership where professional excellence and personal intimacy enhanced each other, proving that the most profound connections often began with the simplest acts of care. Some love stories, they had learned, started with broken equipment and careful hands. The best ones never stopped requiring both.